Hey there, I just wanted to really quickly say that this video was recorded in December. The original plan was this video was going to come out either around Christmas time or the first week of January, and I was really excited for it, but I just could not find footage that I was happy with. So because I couldn't figure out the visuals with the movie footage that was publicly available, I ended up just scrapping the whole thing. I was not happy with it. I did not feel comfortable uploading something that was just a bunch of recycled footage over and over and over again. However, I do still really strongly believe in the points that I'm making in this video, so I wanted to make sure to at least upload it in some capacity. So instead of using any movie footage, anything that I can find publicly available, I am going to just use whatever B-roll I have from my video games. I'm going to choose the more medievally stuff, but I'll use what I've got. Thank you so much for understanding. I really love reviewing movies. I love reviewing TV shows, but it's really difficult when there's only so much footage, and I just personally cannot stand having constantly repeated shots in a video. Like I said, this video was originally recorded all the way back in December, so if you hear anything that you think might be outdated or it sounds like it's from a couple of months ago, that's because it is. Thank you guys so much for understanding. Back to the video. If you had told me a 2D animated movie was going to be in theaters this year, I would not have believed you. So you'd imagine my surprise when I saw an ad for one on my tea while I was sick a few weeks ago. Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim is an actual 2D animated movie that's out in theaters right now. I really just need to get this straight how insane this is. This is not a hybrid movie. This isn't a live action movie with animated elements to it. It's not a live action movie that has little animated pops to it. This is not even a 3D animated movie. It is a fully 2D animated movie that was made for the purposes of being put in theaters. And that's fucking crazy to me. The last movie that I saw that was fully 2D animated in theaters was The Princess and the Frog. I was 8 when that came out. Isn't that fucking crazy? I was 8 years old when the last fully 2D animated movie that I saw in theaters was actually in theaters. Now, WB's animation has a pretty good track record, to be honest. I personally really like a lot of their Justice League films, especially the ones they've been releasing for the Dark storyline these past few years, and maybe I'll make a video about those too, but I really just want to focus on this movie because of how much of an anomaly it is. It is releasing around a ton of other movies that I could probably get more attention for if I talked about instead of this one, but that's kind of the reason why I want to talk about it, because this movie is incredibly interesting to me, just on the basis that I have not seen a 2D animated movie in theaters in so long. And I'll start by saying this, the movie is not doing really that well, primarily because it's not being fucking marketed. I might talk about this on another video, I really don't have time for it right now, but this movie had no marketing. I think I saw one trailer for it before it even came out, and the only reason I knew it was out in the first place was because I was dying of a head cold back when I was working on the Game of the Year video, and I saw an ad for it on the tea that I got to make myself feel better. That's how I found out about this movie. Not from a trailer, although I did eventually see one. Not from anything that I was seeing about it. Not from any sort of a press tour. I found out about it because I was sick. Now, again, I could make this an entire video on its own of how shittily marketed certain things are, especially like Netflix does a really bad job of that for some reason, but I want to focus on this movie, because not only is it an animated movie, and to be honest, that is the reason I wanted to go see it, but it's a Lord of the Rings movie as well. It is an actual canonical piece of the Lord of the Rings canon. That said, I did know Lord of the Rings pretty well growing up. I read the books as a kid, I watched all of the movies, I even watched the, I think, 1990s animated adaptation that was really charming and also kind of horrifying looking. Like, what the fuck is this? And I wasn't just there to see The Hobbit day one. I thought the movies were pretty rough even back when they were releasing. Now, I've kind of mellowed out about Lord of the Rings over the years, and as a whole, I'm pretty neutral to the series nowadays. I actually didn't even watch the Lord of the Rings TV show that came out a couple of years ago. Not for any reason of the discourse that surrounded it. I just didn't have Prime Video at the time, and I didn't really want to get it for a simple show. Point is, as both a casual Lord of the Rings fan on top of an animation junkie, I want to take a look at The War of Rohirrim to see if it's a good movie by itself, or if it's just a flash in the pan. Now, I will be talking about the story much more in depth than I am used to talking about with other things, primarily because there's only so much I can can skirt around without actually getting into the story. So you have been warned. We will be talking about the story, characters, character progression, and the general conflict of this movie. I will keep things as vague as I can because I personally do want you to go see this movie if it sounds interesting to you. However, you have been warned. That said, the overall story here is pretty good. It's not perfect. It definitely has some problems, some that are a lot more noticeable than others. And I'm going to circle back around to, I want to focus on the positives right now because the story as a whole is really nice. I do really like it. Now, I don't remember if the story has ever been told in a book. I know that there's been some form of an origin story for Helm's Deep and things like that. However, I'm not overly versed in it. I don't really well remember it. And I don't know how many details that are in this movie are carried over from a previously existing story, or if everything in here is original. But what is here, I personally think is really cool. The story's a lot smaller in scale than any other Lord of the Rings movie I've seen. Instead of being a giant world-traveling odyssey with sprawling parties and armies, this movie is basically just about one central conflict based in one central kingdom, focused on a small batch of important characters, and I really like that about this story. As a whole, I much prefer fantasy stories that are a lot smaller in scope, focused on more grounded stakes, intimate parties, and more nuanced approaches. Stories like the Hobbit movies with big world-travel parties have always felt so zoomed out to me, and I'm really not a fan. Usually stories like this, at least in my opinion, leave world-building stretched so far that it might be as wide as an ocean, because there's so much that needs attention to it, it doesn't feel like it has the depth it needs. Even worse are when stories do start small, but they keep zooming out further and further until you can barely recognize how you got where you ended up. It's not the kind of thing that's an instant deal breaker for me. I mean, Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal is and has been my favorite Yu-Gi-Oh! Show since I was a kid, and I don't really see that changing anytime soon, but I find that kind of zoomed out storytelling in traditional fantasy stories makes me more tired than anything else. However, Rohirrim doesn't have this issue. On the surface, this movie features 4 separate nations, that being Rohan, or the Rohirrim, Gondor, Dunlending, and the Beast Tribes. But it's a lot more simple than that on the surface once you actually get into the weeds of it. Like I said earlier, this movie only takes place in the kingdom of Rohan. Gondor is brought up quite a few times, but the nation and its people don't actually make an appearance in the movie. And the Dunlending and Beast Tribes are separate entities, but they really serve the same purpose as the group going against Rohan. Even beyond that, this story is also just really simple. Basically, the story is a conflict between Rohan and the Dunlending people for control of the kingdom. A fight breaks out between the two rulers after a marriage proposal goes south, and what was just supposed to be a grudge match ends with Helm accidentally killing his opponent in one punch. As a punishment for lashing out, the people are banished, leaving Freka's son, Wolf, scheming in the shadows to eventually take the kingdom that scorned him down. It's a pretty great story about revenge and the petty wants and desires of a man who's lost sight of everything aside from the man and kingdom who hurt him. He's not even completely wrong about hating Helm so much. After the fight, the guy becomes a huge asshole, basically doubling down on this paranoid, borderline zealotous attitude that was always there just under the surface. Helm straight up refuses to reach out to Gondor for support out of fear of being seen as weak. He sends his trusted aides away when they disagree with him, and he refuses to do what's necessary if it hurts his pride. Despite the fact that this movie starts only a little bit before this conflict, you can really tell that these traits were always there in a certain capacity, but Helm was just a lot better at hiding them. By that measure though, Wolf is a pretty flawed person too. He's angry, covetous, and headstrong to a fault. He becomes so lost in the sauce that he completely disagrees with what his aides say. He lies to his own people to stoke conflict, and when people actually call him on it, they often don't stick around for long. Seriously, I feel so bad for his main aide. The guy pushes him to make good choices the whole way through, advising him not to underestimate the Rohan army, telling Wolf that, hey, maybe we should make sure our people are okay while we're sieging the kingdom, and Wolf just ignores it. There's like so many times in this movie where the advisor tells him, hey, this is obvious bait, don't fall for it, or hey, you've won, stop while you're ahead. And every time Wolf makes the worst possible decision because he's too far gone. It's a really interesting dynamic and I really love it. But that's just the backdrop. The real star of the show is the leading lady herself. Hera is easily the best character in this movie. She's the only daughter of Rohan and she's honestly really cool. She's adventurous and brave in a way that's not only told but shown as well. She's way smarter than everyone else, but not in a way that feels artificial. It feels like she's got a lot of street smarts from actually going out into the world and explore. Almost every fight or conflict she wins either by using the environment around her or approaching the situation from an angle the others haven't thought of. Her plans are straight up devious in this movie. She tricks people in ways I haven't even thought of, and they're really cool to see play out. They also take time to show how much she cares for other people. Almost all the plans she carries out are for the good of the kingdom and the people she cares about. Unlike her dad, she's also caring of the people around her, both in and out of Rohan. She wants Wolf to stop, not just because he's clearly gone way too far for his people, but to put himself at ease. Like I said earlier, though, the story is not perfect, and the story does show some notable cracks when you put an actual magnifying glass to it. Most of it is writing or world building issues, things that honestly don't really change the story that much, but they're frequent enough that they can be really distracting if you're paying attention. One I'd say is kind of small, but just annoys me. It's more of a writing thing. But the other one is a lot bigger. Firstly, this movie loves to only mention names like once or twice, and it's really annoying. For this section, I am not doing any additional research because I just want to give you a sense of how little they actually say names in this movie, but I cannot remember like 90% of these characters' names. The advisor, the shield maiden, both of Hera's brothers, they all get name dropped like exactly once or twice at the start before moving on. Kind of reminds me if you've ever seen the like Kingdom Hearts Union Cross movie where there's like 5 characters, so if they name drop everyone one time, you'll pick it up. But that's not how this movie works. This movie has way too many characters to be able to do that and have it work well. So I'm just looking at someone talking, giving like an emotional moment, and I have no idea what this motherfucker's name is. I swear most of these characters are described more often by what they are than by who they are. And that's really weird to me. I only remembered that this Hobbit guy's name was Leaf because I was seeing him talk about what was going on halfway through, and I realized I don't think they actually said this guy's name before they finally said it in that scene. I actually thought the way they were framing him at the start of the movie, that he was just like a kid, like a 12 or 13-year-old. He was like reading the scroll really shittily. He didn't have a lot of confidence because he really has that energy of like this kid who was thrust way too much responsibility when he's like still trying to figure out the basic things. So check out my surprise when they said he was Hera's personal guard. Like, why didn't you say that in the beginning of the movie? Well, I get it. People don't always say names when they talk to someone they know, but like, your characters may know them, but I don't. And having something sprinkled through like a, hey, Leaf, can you get the firewood? Or something would really go a long way. That's honestly one of the bigger things. There's a few more things I personally don't like. Most of them are just small writing things that wouldn't actually change the outcome of the movie if they were tweaked. Like, for example, the way Helm's final battle goes, where he is fighting to the death in the cold so long he freezes solid, but like despite being directly in front of the gate with line of sight to all of the turrets, none of the archers helped him out like at all, which is weird to me because they're still there. Like, he still would have frozen solid because the guard couldn't make it outside, but they could have helped. There's also a fight with a war elephant where the war elephant gets the drop on Hera's party, but it came from the same direction that the party did, on a flat plain with no trees or other like mountains or anything like that. There's a couple more things on this, but I really don't want to harp on them because, to be honest, this section kind of borders on nitpicking, and I don't really think that's the most valid criticism to make about a movie, especially if it doesn't actually change the outcome of what happens in the movie to begin with. But my last big thing is that this whole movie focuses on Hera. It's her story, it's her journey, she's the one who saves the day, but they focus on it in a way that's really weird. Like, yes, this movie is about Helm's Deep, but it's first and foremost her story. However, from the start of this movie, the narration is constantly telling you that this is a character whose story was lost to time. Hera wasn't remembered, nobody told the story or wrote it down, it was never shared, and she faded away into obscurity. And honestly, that's the dumbest shit I've ever heard. Now, I think this kind of plot device would work for a different movie, and to be honest, I'm pretty sure it was only done because of continuity with like a previous text in the series, but it just does not work here. Let me break down what I mean. You mean to tell me that the only surviving heir to the rulers of Rohan, let alone the only daughter to the family, not only single-handedly led her people to safety, but also actually defeated the beast tribes that were sieging her people all by herself to begin with, and no one wrote that shit down? Honestly, that's kind of ridiculous to me. Like I said, this would work in a different movie about a different story, but the way that it's presented here just doesn't line up. They try to explain this away by showing only her and the army saw what happened, and that she doesn't really care to rule, so she gave up the crown and became this traveling nomad. But that's honestly kind of bullshit to me. Helm spent months pretending to be in a coma so he could sneak out and fight the army as like an Elden Ring character, and rumors spread like wildfire on both sides of the war, inside the fort and on the outside of the siege. So you mean to tell me the person who basically won that war by herself and let the beast tribes who surrendered live had no rumors or stories told about her at all? Again, the people in the castle didn't see what she did, but they didn't see what Helm did either. And for the beast tribes, the fact that no one came up with a story about the Bride of Death or the new Shield Maiden of Helm's Deep or something like that is honestly crazy to me. The way she fought Wolf and just absolutely dog walked him at the end of this movie is honestly so iconic that I wouldn't have cared if this story existing in canon was a problem, because it's a great story that contextually should have been told for generations, written down, made into ballads. We should have had ballads about her. That's honestly like the biggest writing issue I have with this movie. Overall, I'd say the story for this movie is good if you don't think too much about it, and it's just fine, if a bit confusing if you do. So that said, how else does it feel to watch this movie? Well, watching the movie is a bit of a mixed bag. This movie, for example, is really, really pretty. It's similar in style to a lot of fantasy anime you've seen. Think things like Dungeon Meshi or Frieren, stylistically being different than most Western animation, but still holding on to those Western aesthetics and characterization. Overall, I'd say the animation is good on the surface, but kind of rough. Characters look pretty good. There's no character designs that look off to me. Locations are well designed. Lighting is atmospherically consistent, and action is really well done. I actually really want to focus on the action for a sec, because it's not like the kind you've seen in any other Lord of the Rings movies. It's kind of doing its own thing. While the other Lord of the Rings fights are dramatic, drawn out to sell this larger-than-life conflict, fights in Rohirrim are much more grounded. They're almost always one-on-one, and they're directed in an interesting way. Instead of being about these dramatic struggles, fights are really small scale. Usually it's a struggle followed by one or two blows before reaching a decisive victory. It just feels more intimate than some conflicts in, say, The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, and I personally really like it. However, I do wish the rest of the animation had as much care put into it as the action, because while the animation is stylistically really beautiful, it doesn't always look so pretty as it moves. Some of the 2D on 3D shots look pretty good. The shot in the fort escape about a quarter of the way through the movie looks great, but others are kind of meh. They're not like atrociously bad. I'm not talking about Uzumaki level here, but it can be noticeable. Some of the animation is kind of choppy too. Characters will move smoothly in one shot, then they'll be more stilted in the next. Now, you can absolutely use the consistency of animation stylistically, but you can tell that's not what's happening here. While you can notice it in action or movement, it's honestly the most noticeable with the lip syncing. Sometimes it just doesn't feel like the characters' mouths are moving at the same speed as the things that they say. There's a lot of times that the characters' mouths will move one singular time, but the characters' lines will be at least a full sentence. It's kind of hard to describe with the limited footage I can show, but the best way I can is that it looks like a JRPG that didn't change the lip syncing to match an English dub. Now, I'm not an animation expert, I don't work in the industry, so I can't really tell what's going on here. I also can't really find any info in this movie aside that it was made to keep the copyright for Lord of the Rings up, so I'll put it this way. Personally, I just think it's a lip syncing issue that they had to make cuts for time or something. The directors frame shots in this way that either obscures, fully covers, or just straight up hides characters' faces during major lines. There's a lot of shots that start with a character beginning a monologue with the camera facing them, then it snaps to either their back or some action or the other character as they continue, and you can tell that they're intentionally framing shots so that they don't have to do that much lip movement. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with this, but the lip syncing along with the rest of the animation, it looks like either budget or potentially time constraints might have been haunting this movie's production. Again, I can't find really solid info that corroborates either side of this, so take this with a giant grain of salt, but let me say this. If the animation animation in this movie was made for this theatrical release, which I personally believe it is. The lip syncing's pretty rough. It's basically a 50-50 with how accurate it is, but if it was originally made with another language in mind, or something else is going on, then that's another conversation to have. As for music and sound, I want to start by saying that I went to see this in a theater that I had never been to before, so while I don't think what I'm about to say is the theater's fault, I do want to put that out there so y'all know. That said, this movie is just way too loud, like on all fronts, to the point that it was pretty rough watching this movie. Pretty much all of the score in this movie is louder than the actual voices are, to the point where you can't actually hear what characters are monologuing in certain emotional moments. Now, it's not all the time. Scenes with just ambient music are usually pretty good. They're mixed well. They're well under character interactions, like voice acting, other Foley work, stuff like that. But when the score actually comes in, it's usually way louder than it should be. The only way I can explain this is if you've ever watched a movie and the hero does this triumphant, daring stunt that wins the day and the music swells and everyone cheers and pops the champagne everywhere. That's basically the default volume this movie's score starts at. Pretty much immediately starting at a 10 and growing from there. That would be bad enough, but once you start including multiple characters, ambient music, Foley, and other sounds, this loud-ass score gets muddy as hell. Music overwhelms characters, and it makes this movie difficult to understand, especially when you don't always know the names or can't see who's talking. Now, I do want to take a moment to say that I also have sensitive ears, so it was probably louder for me than for other viewers might experience, but if it gets loud enough that I have to cover my ears multiple times in the theater, that's a problem. Now, it's not the first movie to have these kind of issues. I personally remember Across the Spider-Verse got an entire new version of the movie put into theaters because the music was way mixed to shit. Honestly, it really sucks that this is becoming a big problem in new movies, especially animated ones. You know, it's pretty much always a tell of some kind of cost-cutting, crunch culture, and impossible deadlines to get things right, and it's really shitty that this is where we're at right now. Overall, I think the movie's kind of mid, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, and it seems like most people who've watched it seem to agree. The consensus of audiences I've seen seems to be that this movie is really good in theory, but it falters in execution, and I think that's a spot-on description. The characters are interesting and have a lot of depth, but the writing works to hide the best parts within its own canon and only gives me the names like once or two times. The movie looks beautiful, but the actual animation itself is pretty hit or miss. And while the voice acting and music that is there is gorgeous, the mixing of it is honestly kind of unforgivable. I really don't want to say this movie's bad, especially because this is the first 2D animated movie I've seen in theaters in so long. There is definitely a good movie here. Like I said, the characters in the story are awesome, and Harry has easily become one of, if not my favorite character in The Lord of the Rings. But it just needed more time to sand down the edges that are there. Despite my criticisms, I do hope this movie does well. I love animation, especially 2D animation, and so thinking about this movie being a smash hit is really exciting to me. For the longest time, the only 2D animated movies that have been in theaters have been the Studio Ghibli tour, and while I do love those movies, don't get me wrong, I want to see theaters become a place where new 2D movies can thrive. Honestly, the fact that I only found out about this movie because I got a tea while I was sick is pretty disrespectful to the people who worked on it, both the directors, all of the production assistants, and the actual animators who spent time and effort working on this project. This is becoming a really big issue where production companies are sending out animated projects, either for all ages or not, just to die. And then when they make their earnings calls, animation is not doing well. We released one into theaters and it didn't perform. And that's honestly horseshit. So while I have my issues with this movie, again, most of it being on a technical level, if what you've seen about this movie sounds interesting to you, go check it out in the theaters, go check it out if it hits your streaming, and if you like it, let me know in the comments.